Now, I have a tricky question to begin with, and it's this. Who is your favourite Mr. Man? Or indeed Little Miss? Does anyone have a favourite? I have a little, ironically. I like Mr. Small. Very small, isn't he? He has half a pea and a drop of a lemonade for lunch. So there's all sorts we could choose from here. Mr. Tall there is there as well. But I think my favourite it had to be one. It'd have to be Mr. Happy. Mr. Happy. He's a glass half full kind of guy. He's the kind of guy to be around. If you're feeling a bit low, you want to go and be with Mr. Happy. He would be looking for the best in people, looking for the best in a situation. So I guess the question then follows on is how happy are you? How happy am I? Or maybe to put a little bit more of a particular slant on it, how content are you? I put in the word content or contentment into Google, and I found this picture. You can't see it, folks, down there. It's a pig, and she's looking probably, very happy, very content. Content is quietly satisfied. Quietly satisfied. Are you quietly satisfied with life? It's tricky, isn't it? In verse 12 of our reading, Paul says this. He says, I've learnt the secret of being content in any and every situation. If you remember, this letter of Paul was written while he was in prison. This is not a photo of Paul, it's just what I found. But he said, I've learned the secret of being content in every situation. You might be thinking he's writing this from his yacht or his villa in the sun. He's in prison. And he writes this. In fact, in verse 12, he says this. If you look in your Bibles, he says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learnt the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. What situation are you facing where you might be in need of some sort? Because when we're in need of things, either material things or something else, that can be a pressure. But if you notice, he said also whether I was in need or whether I had plenty. And sometimes when we have a lot of stuff, particularly material things, that can cause a problem as well. Have you seen these lottery winners? They go, there we are, here's 50 million quid, and then it all just seems to go wrong. Their life seems to take a bad turn when somebody gives them this telephone number amount of money. What situation are you facing today? Because as I said, Paul was he was in prison. He was in prison probably in Rome. We saw that in the penultimate verse. He says, send my greetings to those in the church in Philippi, especially give the greetings from Caesar's household. So he's writing from the sort of the centre of the empire, but writing this letter, do you remember the letter that's full of joy and full of Jesus? He mentions Jesus Christ again and again and again. And it's full of joy, the opening verse here that Gwen read to us. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord. You just can't keep a lid on his rejoicing. But we also remember it's a thank you letter. Do you remember? It's quite a long letter. When I write thank you letters, dear John, thank you so much for the kind gift you sent me, love Stuart. That tends to be my letter. He's written pages and pages of stuff. But you'll see here, look down with me at verse 15. Where are we? The top of that column there. He says, moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, that's the good news of Jesus, when I'd set out from Macedonia, modern-day Turkey, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. So this church has seen Paul and said, we want to give to you. And Paul has given and received from them. And there's a quote from a guy, I was reading about this. Oh, so that's the letter. And it says this, generous giving and humble receiving oil the wheels of love in the church and flow over in praise to God. Isn't that good? What oils the wheels in the church? Generous giving and humble receiving. And that's not just monetary, that will be other things as well, giving of time and of listening ears and things like that. So as we look at that, we think, well, maybe this was the secret to Paul's contentment. Do you remember this here? I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Maybe that's the answer. That's his secret. He's basically saying it's all about giving and receiving. Well, I think it's actually a little bit more than that, and we'll see that in a moment. But we need to clear the ground a little bit as we come to these things, as we think about contentment. Do you know who these two characters are? Would anyone know? I think you're down there, you might know. Come and have a look. Come someone see this. They're two Americans, I think. And they did a show called, do you know them, Reese? You don't know. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of Mythbusters? Lee's heard of Mythbusters. Mythbusters is a show where you take a well-known fact, and they would test it and see if it's a myth. Okay, so they would say, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, some physical thing where we say we know that this always happens, and they test it. Okay, so there's myths. Are we busting the myths? Well, I think there's a couple of myths that we need to bust when it comes to thinking about contentment and about stuff. And the first one is this, that stuff, things, makes us happy. So there's a bag here that says see, want, buy, happy. I see it, I want it, I buy it, and that makes me happy. Well, material things can be a huge blessing, and it's good to see that everyone's got some clothes on. Some people arrive by car, we've come from homes, they're all good things. But actually, we know that this stuff doesn't make us happy. In fact, I found a quote here from a news article a few years ago that said this about British children, in fact. It said, why are British children so unhappy? The answer, it seems, is that we put too little store on family time and too much on material goods. A UNICEF report argues that the pressure of the working environment and rampant materialism combine to damage the well-being of our children. They want our attention, but we give them our money. All children interviewed said that material goods did not make them happy. Interesting. And it's not just children. Have you heard of J.D. Rockefeller? Yeah, the business tycoon from this day. Arguably the world's richest man ever, if you allow for inflation. And that famous quote, how much money is enough? He said, just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. Here we go, Mr. Bezos. How much would you like? Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. So this stuff. So the first thing is that stuff doesn't make us happy. It's useful. It's not wrong in itself, but it doesn't make us happy. The other one, thinking a bit less about stuff and more about other things, is this. All we need comes from within ourselves. We're told that, just look deep within and you'll find all the answers to your problems. Goodness me. The older I get, the deeper in I look, the more I need help. The more I need rescuing, the more I need a saviour. If I put it like that. We can't help ourselves. Matthew, I haven't asked you this, but I wonder if you might come and help me. Thank you. This is Matthew, our youngest son, who's always willing to get involved. Can you slide down on the floor for me? Thank you very much. Now, would you mind just picking yourself off the floor? Come on then. Come on, can you pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, they say, don't they? You can't do it, can you? You can't pick yourself off the floor. Your dad can, though. Watch this. Thank you, big boy. Saying to somebody, look deep within, the answer's within you, actually, I think is quite unloving. Because then it puts everything on us and say that's where true contentment, write down, be authentic to who you are and your inner self. By the way, you can choose any self you want. It's just really hard and really unloving, I think. So we need to put those two myths away, that stuff makes us happy and all that we need comes from within ourselves. So therefore we say, well, what is Paul's secret to being content? Well, I think it's these three verses. Look down with me. Check the preacher's not making this stuff up. Right, verse 10, little number 10. He says this, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Verse 10. Verse 13, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And verse 19, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. So you see, it's about Jesus. It's about rejoicing in the Lord, do things through his strength, and God will meet all your needs. So Paul, as we look through this letter, he's kind of Jesus powered. That's his sole focus. If you remember back to a few weeks ago, chapter 1, verse 21, he says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain, because I get to be with Christ. He's really, I was going to say consumed by, but really enamored with Jesus and looking to him to meet all his needs. And the key for Paul, if we had a picture of a key here, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. If we had a picture of a key, this key thing for Paul, if we were to turn that key on its side, actually the key thing is the cross. The cross. You see, as we look at the cross and we remember all that Jesus did for us, he was facing an unbelievable situation. Just an incredible situation of need. You talk about when they're in need or in plenty. What was Jesus on the cross? He was whipped, he was stripped, he was beaten. His life was just, I was going to say taken from him. He gave up his life at the end. He breathed his last, the Bible tells us. But he did that for you and for me. And when we come to communion, what do we remember? We don't remember Jesus telling parables and Jesus healing people. We remember Jesus' death for you and for me. And so Paul was really fueled by this, as it were. And it wasn't easy for Paul. You may remember a few weeks ago I read from 2 Corinthians, another letter that Paul had written, and he said some of the things had happened to him as a result of following Jesus. He said, 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1, which I think is 39. He was whipped. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I've been on the move. I've been in danger from rivers and bandits and the countryside. And the list goes on and on of these things that he did. But he said, I've learnt to be content in all these circumstances. He learnt to be content. You see that in verse 11 and 12. That word comes up twice. He says, I have learnt to be content whatever the circumstances, verse 11, and verse 12. I have learned the secret of being content. How do we learn? What do we do? When we learn, we probably listen to someone or something teaching. There's listening to something, but then there's putting it into practice. There's practice. There's working it out. We don't just say, "Oh, I want to get better at bowls or golf or sailing or something," and just say, "Well, I'll just sit back and hope I get better." You're gonna practice it. And that's what Paul did here, practice walking with Jesus. And elsewhere, in another letter Paul wrote, he says this, you might know this verse. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. That's from the end of 1 Thessalonians. If Paul doesn't say give thanks for all circumstances, praise the Lord, I'm being pelted with rocks. But he gives thanks in all circumstances. And I think part of this, about practicing, learning to be content and giving thanks, I think this is really helpful for us. And to help us with this, I've got a little acronym here, PAST. Where is it? PAST. Can stand for this: practice and say thanks. So practice being content and saying thank you to God, giving thanks to God in those circumstances. And the reason I say it's past is because we look back to the cross. I had an old geography lecturer called Dick Mayhew, and I was out on some field trip once with him, and he said the past is the key to the present. So if you look at some mountainside and you see some valleys and you see a river and everything else, he says, if you look back in the past, that will tell you why it's the shape it is today. Yeah? So this physical geography. I can bore you like this forever, so I won't go on. But the past is the key to the present. And actually for us, the past, what's gone on the cross is really key, and plays out today. So we want to look to the cross, look to Jesus, keep our focus on him, even in the most difficult of circumstances, And as I look around, I know that folks are going through that. I'd like to invite somebody out now to come and share a little bit about what's going on in their life. And they're actually my favourite member of the congregation. Do you know I do have favourites? Would you like to come out, Mr. Silk? This is Catherine, this is my wife. She's very kindly agreed to share a little bit, because I've been talking about this, looking to the cross. What does it mean to follow Jesus in hard times? And I said, would you share a little bit about your life? Because, well, not only do you have to live with me, but things aren't always easy health-wise. So do you want to share a little bit about that?
Opposites attract, they say. Stuart is the outgoing, loves being at the front. I'm not that person, so bear with me if I'm not as eloquent as he is. Yeah, but it is actually a privilege to be able to share something of what God has been teaching me in these last few weeks. Some of you will know, because I wasn't here at church for a few weeks, that I've been quite poorly, but actually it's been a really quite exciting time, and it's nice to be able to share that with you. So what you may not know about me, if you only see me on a Sunday morning, because I'm usually quite smiley and chatty, is that I have chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, and it's quite a hard illness, actually. It's quite hard to live with. Day by day, I have nausea, pain, I have brain fog or brain freeze, which makes it really hard to think through things, to concentrate on things. My memory's not very good. I have a sort of very skin sensitivity, and when I get tired by the end of today, my skin is really antsy. That's a really hard thing to explain, unless I think if you've been pregnant, because sometimes pregnant women feel that. And by the end of the day, I can feel like clothes are too much, the bed sheets are too much. Yeah, it's just really uncomfortable. So that there's that day by day. Often people think ME is about maybe not being able to walk that well. And I do get tired, but actually outdoors, I really enjoy. I enjoy walking the dog, and I love wild swimming, which is something I've discovered. It's actually inside that's really hard, because for me it's a sensory overload. So noise is hard. The TV is hard. Going into Tesco, I don't go to Tesco. I go to a supermarket that's a lot quieter, that has less artificial light, less beeping, not music on the sound system. All of that's really tiring for me. Bowling, that sort of swimming pools. I can't swim indoors now. All of those things are actually really, really tiring for me, and it limits my life. Actually, if I do any of those really tiring things, I'm usually quite ill afterwards. I don't want to labour that, but just because actually for lots of people, ME is a hidden illness. People don't see it. And it's also a very lonely illness for that reason, because it's very hard for other people to get. Of course it is, even for my family. It's hard. They see a lot of it, but there's a lot that they don't see, and they try and understand. For example, so I went to, a few weeks back, Stuart and I had, our eldest son is 21, and we took him to London for the day. We went to the Excel Centre for a Formula One exhibition. We went to the West End for a play, which is wonderful. Both of those environments are very intense. And then on the way home, we actually visited my godfather, who's dying. So I knew that it was the last time I'd see him. And that was very emotional, and emotion is also a very tiring thing. When I got back from that trip, I was pretty ill, and I had 4 days in bed. I just got out to the toilet just about. My family fed me my meals. And that's the side of ME that I find the hardest, is the burden that I feel I am on people, the guilt of whether I did too much, and now that's on, that now these people need to look after me. And I sort of analyse everything, and I go round and round thinking, if I'd done something different, or if I hadn't done that, and if I was a bit selfish there, all of that stuff. And I've been grappling with that for 10 years, but God has been teaching me so much in these last few weeks. And over these last few weeks, so I was ill, and I was quite upset, thinking I'm not going to get away for a weekend. That I was going on a clergy spouse weekend, and I thought there's just no way I'm going to get there. I'm in bed this day, and I'm supposed to be going tomorrow to this clergy weekend. But I did get there. Oh, and gosh, it was like God was speaking just to me. There were there were a few clergy spouses there, but God was speaking just to me. And I just want to encourage you with that, actually, that knowing Jesus is a personal relationship. I know Jesus, I mean, just in the same way, it's a relationship like I know Maureen, it's a relationship like I know Mary. And God does speak to us very personally into our situations. And he was teaching me through that. I had a day's rest, and then Stuart and I went to a pastoral refreshment conference, which I thought, Lord, that's atrocious timing, as if God's timing is ever wrong, because he continued to teach me through that. And then also through this letter that we've been doing, Philippians. There's just so much where God has been speaking to me. And the key things he's been teaching me is, firstly, it's day by day. And I'm a planner and an organizer, and you might not know that because I'm not involved in much in church. I would love to be. That is where I really want to be. But God is teaching me that despite writing lists and lists about the things I need to do, that I have to take each day, day by day. Mercies are new each morning. And that he will provide me with what I need for that day, for what he wants me to do. Regardless of my lists or what I want to do, is what he wants me to do. It's being thankful, which I thought was really important, being thankful and seeing the positivity. And, you know, when I was on this pastoral conference, I was talking through this with somebody and saying what God had been teaching me, and actually just sharing that there is a positive side to CFS, and that's the fact that there are some times when all I can do is sit. And I say to myself, all I can do is I can just sit with Jesus. And then he said to me, my goodness, that is a gift. And I took that away and reflected on it, and I thought, goodness, that is a gift. I hadn't seen it as a gift before, but I am a busy person and I like to do things, and I have 4 children and there is plenty to do in the house, and yet it forces me to sit in Jesus' presence. And sometimes I can't pray, I can just sit there and I know that he's with me, and I'm thankful that I'm forced into that position in a way. On my less generous days, I don't see it as a gift, but the other phrase that stuck with me from this time was that it's a hiccup in eternity, that whatever that day is, it's a hiccup in eternity, and Jesus has promised me eternity, and it is just a small part of that. I can't remember all I was going to say, except for I just feel, I feel like I'm finally coming to a place where I feel content. I can't say I've learned contentment like Paul, but I really feel like I'm learning it. And God is just so gracious and so good. And he is faithful. He is faithful. I can't remember what I was going to say.
I just say, can you say a few words? And it was brilliant, wasn't it? Wasn't it encouragement? Thank you so much. Well, there we are. What an encouragement. She happens to be my wife, but that was, I think it was real encouragement about God working in hard times.